Thank you very much. And hello, everybody. I'm Elizabeth Selby, and I'm a commercial contracts lawyer at Bexley Beaumont. And I thought I'd use my slot today to explain to you, first of all, what a commercial contracts lawyer actually does, because I think sometimes there's quite a bit of confusion around that. And then go on to talk about how I can help specifically you, but also potentially your customers. Um, I'm going to explain why I think it's always worth investing. Obviously, I would say that and getting your commercial contracts right. And then I thought it'd be useful to finish by just sharing a few sort of contract tips in terms of when you're looking at a contract, what are the sort of clauses that you should absolutely include when you're working with your customers? So that's a brief overview of what I'm going to talk about. So I thought it'd be helpful just to give a little bit background first of all. So like as is, I work through a firm called Bexley Beaumont. I'm a self-employed lawyer along with about 70 other partners. And between us, we all cover a wide range of sort of legal practice areas. So we've got employment, property, dispute resolution, family law, that as is does, corporate, and then of course commercial, which is where I sit. So that's Bexley Beaumont. In terms of me, I started my career in London. I worked there for a number of years. I then moved to Sydney, where I worked for 7 years before. And so what I did while I was in London and Sydney is I worked on sort of big, really big infrastructure projects. So things like schools, transport, hospitals, and defence projects. And yeah, absolutely loved the work that I did, but it was very much sort of it was full on. I'd work on one project for a couple of years and yeah, fairly intensive. Anyway, in 2013, sort of a big about turn, came back to the UK, settled in West Yorkshire. You've got a nice view of Burley Moor there, and reinvented myself as a general commercial contracts lawyer. And the reason for that was entirely sort of practical. I'd got two young children by that point, and projects law just wasn't sustainable. Um, yeah, and so I've grown my practice over the last 12 years. Absolutely love what I'm doing now, and it gives me a really good variety. I get a huge range of clients, lots of different types of work, but yeah, little bit more sustainable with young children. So, what exactly is a commercial contracts lawyer? I actually find that it's generally easier to start by saying what I don't do. So, what I don't do is I don't buy or sell businesses. I don't advise on HR or employment law. Um, and if you need to go to court because you've got a dispute with one of your customers or a supplier, then I'm not the right person to help you. Although for all of those things, I do have colleagues who can. But what I can do and what I do is to advise businesses on their day-to-day business relationships. So effectively the relationships that keep companies going and in operation. So that is when it boils down, what it boils down to really is it's the buying and selling of goods and services, and then the contracts behind those relationships. And what I always do with my clients is, my goal is always to make sure that the contracts that you have in place for buying and selling goods and services, they're clear, they're fair, and ultimately that they protect you against legal, but also commercial risks. I've got clients sort of across sort of huge range of sizes, from PLCs right down to one man, one woman bands. What I want to focus on today, though, is how I help owner managed businesses, because I think that's probably most relevant for everybody on the call, both in terms of your own businesses and also when you're supporting your own customers. So probably the most important, most useful thing I can do for owner managed businesses is to help them sort out their terms of business. So what I do is to sit down with a client and help them draft effectively plain English terms and conditions. And what those terms and conditions do is to accurately set out what you're selling and importantly, the terms on which you're willing to do so. I tend to get three different types of clients who need help with their terms of business. So the first ones are those they've got terms of business in place. They've had them drafted in the past by a lawyer. But for whatever reason, they now think they could do with a bit of an update. Now, that could be because they're aware that there's been a change in law. So that might be data protection. They think they need some sort of update. Or it could be because the business has evolved. So it started off doing one thing, but over the years, either the business focus has changed slightly, or they might have had a sort of odd little sticking point with a customer and think, actually, we'd like to tighten up our contract to make sure we're better protected. So those sort of clients, very easy to help. It's normally just small changes to existing, we can use their existing contract as a base. The next type of client that comes to me are those who have either borrowed their terms from competitors, or perhaps when they left their previous business, they may have just taken them with them, given them a few tweaks and use them for their new business. And then also I'm starting to see a lot of AI, so chat GPT drafted contract terms. Now, I'm just going to say, I'm not going to get into a big discussion about that. My advice would be don't, please. But if you do, and I have seen it, there is absolutely no judgment, but it is definitely worth getting them looked at properly. Um, the risks there are huge. If you borrowed from a competitor, it's obvious, isn't it? Your business might not be quite the same. Your appetite for risk might be different. They might have come from a business, that's a lot bigger with a lot more funds behind it. And the risk with ChatGPT, obviously, is things get missed, and some things are just fundamentally wrong. And then the third type of clients that come to me are those that just don't have any terms at all, and they might have operated like that for years, really on the back of purchase orders. So they'll have something that sets out the price, delivery terms, and that's pretty much it. And I tend to find those clients come to me after something's gone wrong. So they'll have had a dispute with a customer, and they'll suddenly realize that they really weren't very well protected, and they need to do something to sort that out. And that really brings me on to my next point, which is, why is it worth investing in these contracts? And obviously, the biggest reason why businesses delay getting proper terms in place is because of cost. And when you're starting out, every penny counts, doesn't it? I know that as a business owner. And to be honest, that's not even just at the beginning. That's throughout your business journey. You're constantly making sure that you are spending money in the most effective way, and on the things that you're going to get most benefit from. But the problem with not investing in your T's and C's, your terms of business, is that you can end up facing much bigger costs down the line. So obviously, if you run into a challenge with a customer, either they're not paying you, or they find themselves stuck in a contract, and actually there's no way of them exiting it because there's no decent termination provisions. You then find yourself stuck in a contract. You can't change the scope, you can't change your fees, and it's just not working for you, this contract anymore. You can end up spending thousands trying to get yourself out of that contract. And sadly, I do get a lot of clients referred to me through my dispute resolution colleagues. And by the point that these clients come to me, they've already, as I say, spent tens of thousands of pounds trying to sort out a dispute. And then I think the other really important thing to remember, if things do go wrong in your business, it's not just about the cost impact of a dispute. You've also got to think about the impact that it has on you as a business owner. It's a horrible thing to have to deal with a dispute. It's the sort of thing that keeps you awake at night, but it also distracts you, doesn't it, from the day-to-day running of your business. So instead of focusing all your energy on growing the business, all of a sudden you're firefighting. And that inevitably, I think, has an impact on revenue and profitability. So for all of those reasons, I often explain to clients that my, T's and C's, terms of business, it's almost like an insurance policy. Pay a small amount up front, get that document in place, and hopefully that will then stop you sort of having to face any horror stories and disputes further down the line. So as well as terms of business, which, as I say, is the sort of the thing that I do most, and it's the starting point, and there's no point fixing anything else for businesses until you've got those in place. But if you have got your terms of business, then there's a lot of other things that I can do to help. So the first bullet point here is just around your key customer contract reviews. So this is where you win a big new customer, and they turn around and say to you, well, we don't want to use your terms of business. We've got our own contract and you need to sign up to that. And obviously, at that point, you're not going to start redlining a contract and trying to make loads of changes because you don't want to annoy the client. And also, you just want to get on and deliver whatever it is, the project. But I'd always say it's worth just stopping and pausing. It's not business at any cost. You need to make sure you understand what's in those customer contracts. And what I can do is work with you to sort of rag rate a contract. So we're not going to pick up on all the issues that ideally we'd have. And if it was your terms of business, things we'd protect against, but we'd maybe pick out 3, 4, 5 things that are absolutely key. And if you get those things right, you will find that your business is protected much better. I'm going to come on to the sort of things that you should look at a little bit later. Do that in a few minutes. Yeah, so that's key customer contracts. So then the flip of that is, well, have you got any supplier contracts? So when you're the customer, so are there any goods or services that you need to procure for your business? Now, depending on the type of business you've got, you might have quite a complicated supply chain, or you might not really have much need to buying goods or services at all. It might all be really low value, you're comfortable, you don't need anybody to look at a contract. But if you suddenly find that you've got a need to, I don't know, bring on a project manager, for example, or some consultancy advice, or you decide, you're taking on employees, so you might want to outsource HR functionality, you might be buying in IT software, things like that. I can help you look at those contracts and just make sure that you're not tying yourself into something, a contract that you then can't get out of for years, and it's going to cost you a lot of money. I've mentioned franchise agreements very briefly on the slide. I'm not sure there's anybody on the call today who operates through a franchise model, but I know there are people in the Friday group that do. So again, whether you're the franchisor who's looking to protect your trademarks and the reputation of your business, or you're a franchisee looking to buy into the franchise, again, I can just help make sure that you're protected before you sign up to anything. Website compliance, I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory, but that's helping you to make sure that the documents that you should have links to on your website, that they're there, and also that they are legally compliant. So I'm thinking things like cookie policies, privacy notices, and then if you sell your goods or services to consumers, making sure that your terms and conditions comply with consumer legislation. And then finally, I've put business health checks on there. And this is basically, we'd sit down together and effectively audit your key contracts. So this isn't just your commercial contracts now, this is all the contracts you have within your business. So it might be things like your employment contracts, your employment policies, as well as all your customer and supplier contracts. We sit down and work out if there are any gaps, or perhaps contracts that have expired, or were never put into place in the first place, or if there's some clauses in there that really don't work for you. And then the idea is that we can identify where the risks are and then fix them. And the reason why I do that with clients is generally if they're looking to sell their business. It's something that I can do right up until the point where you put your business up for sale. But ideally, if we can look at it 2-3 years in advance, you've obviously got a chance to fix anything that needs sorting. There are 2 key benefits to doing this sort of business health check exercise. Firstly, it makes you look really organised and professional when you do get to that sale point. So when the due diligence exercise starts, when the seller's solicitors start asking for all of these documents, if you've got them readily available, it just gives a really good impression of a well-run business. It also speeds the sale process up. You're not trying to scrabble around trying to find documents. And then the other reason is sometimes you'll have customer contracts that you didn't really realise that maybe you'd signed up to, but the contract effectively says that if you want to sell the business, you have to get the permission of your customer. And if these are your key customers, and it's the contracts that really do add value to your business, if you then find you can't transfer those contracts to your buyer without getting your customer's consent, and it actually can have an impact on the bottom line sale price. And I've had clients sadly caught out with that before. So as with all things contractual, start thinking about it early. It's cheaper that way, it's less stressful, and it really can help you sort of improve the value for your business. Okay, so I promised that I would talk about a few things that, sort of practical tips, things that you can actually go away and look at. If you have got terms and conditions of your own, you can have a look at and just check you cover these things off in your contracts, or next time you're dealing with a contract with a big customer and they give you their terms and conditions to look at, just come back to these 5 points and check they're in there. So the first one is to have a clear scope of work. Now, this sounds really obvious, but it's amazing how often it gets overlooked. This is where you need to set out really clearly what it is that you're supplying, whether that's goods or services. And things get really messy if it's not clear, because what you often then have, if you're providing services, you get to the end of delivery and then the customer turns around and says, no, that's not what we wanted. Either we need you to do another draft, we need you to do this, we need you to do that, or simply we're not paying. And then you get into an argument and you go back to the contract and you realize, actually, although you thought you were really clear on what you were doing from an objective perspective, perhaps it wasn't clear. So it's just worth spending time. And that links back to my earlier point about if you've borrowed terms from a competitor, and this can be where actually you find your scope of work is different to theirs. And you might be promising to do stuff in your contract that actually doesn't form part of your key service provision. And then the flip side of that, so clear scope of work is what you're doing. The next point is what you need your customers to do. Now, most customer contracts won't have any obligations on the customer other than the obligation to pay. So all the obligations are on you. All the customer has to do is pay for the goods or services. But that really doesn't reflect what happens in practice. And I think if you all just take a moment and think about how you work with your customers, I suspect you all need them to do stuff. And it can be really obvious things. It might be reviewing a draft report. It might be reviewing a prototype if you deliver goods. You might need your customers to attend regular meetings, and you want to make sure that you've got the person with the right level of seniority in that meeting so they can make decisions there and then without delaying the project timeline. And as I say, all of those things are really obvious, but if they're not in the contract, and you then have the situation where the customer doesn't do what you need them to do, or they don't do it in a timely fashion, you get to the end of the contract and then the customer says, well, I'm not paying you because you delivered late. The deadline was the end of October and we're now 3 weeks into November. And you quite rightly point out and say, well, hang on a minute, we couldn't do what we needed to because you were late doing your part. And that's when a lot of disputes arise. If you've got something clear in your contract that says you need to do X, Y, and Z, and if you don't, basically we are off the hook in terms of our delivery timeline, you'll find that really useful. Payment terms are, that's obvious. I'm sure you've all got that in your contract, but just think about how it works if you're trying to get an upfront payment, at the start of the contract, and you might want to get 50% on project commencement. Just think about what your payment terms actually say in your contract, because if they say 30 days, even if you said that you'll invoice 50% up front, you actually won't get that payment till 30 days in. So it's things like that that can trip you up. Limitations on liability, that's a huge topic in its own right. So all I'd say for now is just make sure that you cap your liability at a sensible amount. And generally as a business owner, I would say, so make sure that's an amount that you feel comfortable with, thinking about your insurance, your risk profile and all of that. And then finally, termination rights. Again, just make sure these are fair, they're balanced, and they're not just in favour of the customer, so that if you do have a difficult contract and you want to get out, you do have some options. Okay, so just wrapping up, I'm very aware of time. I guess the key thing to remember from today is that your contracts don't need to be scary, and they certainly shouldn't be viewed as something that's unnecessary. It's definitely worth investing a bit of time and money in getting them right. And if you do that exercise, you'll find that your contracts, these supplier and customer contracts, they're going to protect your business. They're going to give you peace of mind, which as a business owner means you get to sleep at night. Um, and they'll allow you to focus on growth rather than constantly firefighting within your business. And then the other thing that I'd say is just find the right lawyer for you. That needs to be somebody that you get on with. It needs to be somebody you trust, somebody who takes the time to actually genuinely understand your business, your drivers, and your appetite for risk. Okay, I appreciate that's been a whistle-stop tour, both in terms of sort of what I do and also the sort of clauses to include in your contracts. We're out of time really, aren't we? But if anybody does have any questions, let me know. And otherwise, I'm more than happy to set up a one-to-one separately and talk about your sort of specific questions, or if you think you've got any customers that would benefit from getting terms and conditions in place, do let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. If you've got any questions, take yourself off mute. But my one question is, the businesses and new businesses going to look at business plans. I've never seen this kind of contracts in them. How neglected is it for people just to overlook it and just set up a business?
I think I mean, it happens all the time. And I think, people know that they need, if they're taking on any employees at the start, they know they need HR advice. And I've talked to Michael about this actually as well. People know they need accountancy advice, but they just don't realise how important that document is. So I don't know. I mean, I would say probably more than half of businesses just don't have terms and conditions in place when they start up. And as I say,
Wow.
it's a real challenge because if you haven't got the finances, it's like where do you conjure up a couple of £1,000s from in order to get those terms in place? But there are grants available. I've been talking to Colin, you've introduced me to people at Leeds City Council where there are grants available for exactly this sort of thing. And it is worth, or talking to your financiers, your bank or whatever. And most financial institutions will actually it's something they'll really support because they can see that you're then risk averse and potentially it can protect the business down the line. So again, it comes back to that sort of insurance policy point. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Dave. It's something that is hugely overlooked.